So for AAA is a term that define how user could authenticate to a system, how user could be authorized to deal with the system, what is the valid resources that they can access by accessing the system, and how to track and log this user's activities. So AAA is a term related to a process called identity and access management. And the identity and access management in any organization, or the IAM function, is responsible for giving users access to organizational system based on some criteria. These criteria could start by identification. I could give you an access based on identifying who you are. I can identify who you are by your fingerprint, for example, by your face ID. I can identify who you are by the user agent or browser or machine that you are using. Fine. So whenever I saw, for example, someone who is, let's say, enters the building, and this one is wearing a suit or wearing the uniform of my company. I can by only see this situation, understand that or identify that this one is belong to our company and this is could be possibly an employee. But we need to do a verification to ensure that this one is really from our company. So we will request him to scan his fingerprint or do a kind of biometric authentication in order to enter the facility or enter the building. And that's what do we mean by authentication. So identification is only about identify who you are, but in authentication we try to give you a mechanism to prove who you are. This mechanism can be authentication, can be multi-factor authentication, can be something such as password, biometric data, and the goal of the authentication process is to provide you with or to ensure the verification of your identity. Fine. So what does it or what all of this relate to organizations? In any system that we are maintaining in our organization, whether this system was related to IT management, such as firewall management, antivirus, or was related to the business and users interaction with the company data, we should have a sort of authentication. Nobody should be authorized to access the system unless it is authorized or unless it is authenticated and allowed to do so. And authentication in this case consider or complement which aspect in the CIA triad it support also the confidentiality. Data will be only available to only those who are authorized to see or deal with it. So this is the authentication. After being authenticated, you should be checked against a specific or predetermined criteria to identify which resources that you are allowed to deal with. If we are talking about a web application or a web filtering, the policy or the policy of the web filtering that I can grant to the normal user could be different than the same policy or the policy that I could grant to top management or senior management or for the IT people in general. So in this situation, based on your authentication and based on your proof that you are from IT or a normal user, I can authorize you with a permission profile. This permission profile would allow to you as an IT to open file sharing websites, to download software, and so on. But if you are not, so you will not be allowed. So authorization process define to the user which resources he is allowed to access. And along the way, any activity that was related to authentication or authorization or dealing with the resources that you was allowed to deal with, any activity should be logged. And that will help us to promote the accountability to confirm that your actions are tracked and everything is logged. And that's at the end will support the concept of non-repudiation. Correct? So that's what do we mean by identification, authentication, authorization, and accountability. And for any system in the organization, we need to make sure that our system support all of these three aspects. I cannot have a sensitive application of my organization that lack the authentication function or identification function. I could have a system that support like a pre-shared key for authentication. But this is a problem because this system is only address the authentication part. Based on the pre-shared keys that you will enter without any username, you will be allowed to access the system. But this could be an issue because you will not be able to identify who is trying to access this system because this shared password can be with anyone. You should have a mechanism in any application or in any system to provide authorization. For example, when you open a website or a web application, you should have like a permission for administrator that allow him to shut down the system, for example, or install security patches. You should have another permission for normal users. You should have the ability on this system to do something like this. For accountability, any system that you have in the organization should have a sort of logs, and these logs could or should record what is happening on this system. When this administrator log into the system, what he did using his authorization level. For example, and if we came back again to the FortiGate example, in FortiGate or in this firewall, we have a specific tab for logs and reports. One of these logs are the system events, which can provide you information about what done by the administrator on these systems, and it gives you information that in this time the following activity happened by the administrator, the following activity happened by the system itself, and so on. So you should have this all of these elements considered while you are dealing with any system or purchasing or developing a system. And what do we mean by developing and purchasing? The developer is responsible to write every line in the code if we are talking about in-source application development by having like a developer work for the company. So they need to ensure that all of these features are addressed in their code. So here we are discussing what is the authentication, and authentication is about verifying who you are or validating who you are. And using the password is the most common term in authentication. But what if this password got leaked or got cracked? In this case, the hacker can use this password and regain or gain access to the system. Or even if the password was not cracked, if this password does not use a special strong password, or we don't apply caution while we are selecting a password, this password could be cracked by an attack called brute force. Brute force attack is kind of password cracking attacks, and in brute force, the hacker use a special tools such as a tool called Cain and Apple, other tool called Hydra, and these tools are rely on kind of dictionary, and dictionary is essentially like a text file, and in this text file we can have billions of passwords. These passwords could be randomly created passwords, could be password leaked from the internet. Every year, when you browse the internet by the end of the year, for example, you can find an interesting article that tells you top 20 used password in 2021, for example. So essentially, it is not only 20 passwords used in 2021. Hackers can create files that include, as per their experience, the most common passwords that they saw during their attacks. And in this situation, these passwords can be gathered inside a single file, and this file will be used as a dictionary, which can be used to try to crack your own password. How hackers can get the most common used passwords? One of the examples, there was a website and this website was vulnerable. So hacker attacked this website and extracted the list of users database on this website. And after then, all of these passwords will be considered a possible passwords that can be used on the web. User might register to this hacked website as well as multiple websites at the same time using the same password. So user can use the same password twice on different applications, and that might make his account subject to be hacked by brute force attack if relied on a dictionary that include his password, which leaked from another website. Make sense? Or not making sense? Okay. Okay. So we will talk about what is pass the hash and what is rainbow table in its time. Don't worry. And generally, to secure yourself in the relation, if you decided to use password only for authentication, you need to have a password that is more than 12 characters, and you need to use password manager. Password Manager is a kind of software that you can install in your Windows system, or you can use Google Password Manager if you are dealing with Google Chrome. Whenever you register to a new website, you will find that Google Chrome is suggesting to you to use a special password. This password is very complex and you can accept or reject, by the way. But personally, I use password manager in my day-to-day operation because I cannot use the same password with the same website two times. Because in case the first password got leaked, the hacker can use the same password to attack my other accounts. Because in some cases, and as I mentioned, some website could be subject to a cyber attack. And as a result of this cyber attack, the database of usernames and password will be leaked. And username are usually is my email address. Okay, so hacker can take the email address and password and try to open the Facebook and Twitter and Gmail using it. And if I'm using the same password, he will be able to access to multiple websites with the previously shared password and username. Make sense? That's why it is recommended to use password manager. Why? Because you will not be able to remember every particular password you wrote for a specific website. But you can find a way, by the way, such for example, creating a standard password for yourself. But if we are working with Facebook, for example, so you can start the password with the first half of the website and end the password with the second half of the website name. That might work in some situation, or you may write the name of the website at the beginning or at the end. So that will make you remember or will allow you to remember what is the particular password of each website. But to come over such complication, you can use a password manager and you need to ensure that you are using a secure password manager. Because if the password manager got attacked, all of your data will be lost, by the way. Okay? So when you use password, it is recommended to use more than 12 characters. Why? Because it proved that any password less than 11 characters can be cracked using an attack called rainbow table. We understood what is a hash, right? We discussed what is the concept of hashing before, correct? Okay, so again, what is a hash? And I'm not repeating myself, but I'm just, as you can see, all of this information are connected with each others. Let's close this website and let's try to open SHA hash generator. So what is a hash? When I write, yeah, not only document, by the way, any piece of data. For example, we are all familiar with this password, right? One of the common used passwords. This password has this identical hash. whenever you try to write this password anyway, the website that you are writing this password at it, in fact, this website does not store your password in the way you wrote it. The website will take this password and will convert it to a hash. And then it will store the hash value, not the actual password, to protect your password from being leaked in case the database of password got hacked or this website was subject to a cyber attack. So normally the website is storing password or storing the hash of the password. The hash of the password. Clear? So that's right. It could be hacked if the hacker did a kind of comparison between the clear text value and each hash. Is that what you are trying to say? That you are correct. Although user or hackers are or web administrator store passwords in a hash form, but this also does not protect these hashes from being cracked, because there is another password attack called pass the hash. In pass the hash, we use GPUs, we use high resource and high power computation devices, and we do the following. We first create random passwords, and then we try to generate every possible hash for all of these passwords. Whenever the hacker hack a database of a website and finds that in this database there is hashes of passwords, he will try to use another tool called rainbow table. Rainbow table is essentially the clear text password and its relevant hash value. So if our calculation revealed to us that the hash of password text is something like this, we will compare the hash we captured from the website with this value of hash, and then we will find a match, and then we will know that this hash or this password is this particular password. Clear? But in fact, it is a very complicated thing to do, because if we went to this website, this website is like a project called Rainbow Table Project. In Rainbow Table Project, we have like a databases of pre-computed rainbow tables. And we agreed that in each rainbow table we have what? We have passwords and its related hashes. So in case you got like a hash values from a website, you can use this rainbow table. And for some reason it is not working. I don't know why. I tried it with another class and it was not working. Rainbow table project. I believe this is the link. It is working. Okay. What you can see here right now is a website that include multiple rainbow tables. Each one of this is essentially a rainbow table. In this rainbow table, you have like the clear text password and its relevant hash value. Fine. This file, for example, include passwords from 1 to 7. So it includes every possible password combination between 1 and 7. What is the size of passwords included in this file? It is above 7 trillion passwords or 7 trillion hash. Because if we calculated all combinations between 1 to 7, so we will start by password called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, A1, A2, A3, and go along this way, we will get this combination of passwords. And what could be the size of this file? What if you are using 8 characters of password? In this case, both of these tables will not be relevant. You need to go to this one, which include like, what is the number after trillion? Okay, imagine how it could looks like, and imagine what is the size needed and what is the time needed to compare the hashes with password. What about if you are using 10 characters? This is the possible combination. And by the way, 10 characters does not include capital or special characters. It is only lower alphabetic and numerical values. So the longer you create your password and ensure that this password is not common and not used across multiple websites and cannot be easy guessed, you will make your data or make your password not subject to be cracked by rainbow table. Because the largest rainbow table so far, as I know, does not include data more than or characters more than 10. Make sense? Okay, so another technique that web administrators are using to secure their password or their hashes against rainbow table is by using a technique called salting. Salt. We know what the salt is, right? Salt is salt, like pepper that we add to. What do we mean by salt? We change the taste of a certain food or something like this, right? So when the website receives a password from you at the first time, the website will play with this password, will add a special character to this password in addition to the one you added before. And then it will create or generate what? Hash for the salted password. Actually, he changed how the hash looks like. So me and you might use the same password. But every time the website, while it was receiving this password from us at the first time, he will apply additional technique to change how the hash will looks like. And that is called salting. So salting is a way that websites are using while they are generating hashes for the password to ensure that if two people provided the same password, they will not be equal to the same hash value. Fine? Okay. So, and of course, for authentication itself, we should have a standard naming convention. That is not related to passwords, but we should have a standard naming conventions for user accounts. So we start by last name dot first name dot last name, and so on. So we should have like a standardization way in writing the names in the organization. Multi-factor authentication is using something you have or something you are in addition to something you know, which was a password. So multi-factor authentication can be used especially if we are dealing with a sensitive system. The goal of multi-factor authentication is to protect your accounts or protect your access from being hacked because of your password got cracked. Okay, so we can use different ways to make multi-factor authentication work. We can use a password, and this could be something you know already. We can use the OTP or authentication token, which could be something you have. When you go to the credit card or to the ATM machine and you enter your card and then enter your PIN, essentially you are using a multi-factor authentication. The card itself is something you have in your hand, while the PIN code is something you know, and it is not written on the card itself. Okay? And you can also use one of the biometric authentication factors, such as fingerprint, such as iris scan, which can prove who you are. So in multi-factor authentication, this is beyond the scope of the course, by the way. But in multi-factor authentication, we have a lot of techniques. But the best technique to implement biometric-based authentication would be the iris scan, not the fingerprint, because fingerprint is subject to false rejection which means you may need to enter your fingerprint twice or three times in order to the system to read it properly. But iris scan would be the best. But what is the reason? It is related to some kind of computational and algorithm and something that you really do not to take care about right now. But there is a reason why iris scan considered the best, because it provides the lowest false acceptance rate and provides the false rejection rate. So the possibility to identify the correct one could be from the first scan using iris scan. But in biometric or in voice tone, for example, if we are using voice to log into a system, it could be not from first time. It may ask you to repeat what you said again. And the possibility for accepting someone falsely, someone who is not authorized to do or to log in, but he is going to be accepted, will be high using the voice tone. I can record a voice for someone and then use it to access to the system. So that makes the voice-based authentication is very easy to come over it. For fingerprint, I can capture one of the fingerprints from a glass or something like this, and then I can reuse it. So that's why fingerprint also is not that good. But in case of iris scan is the most secure. If the one is alive, his iris scan will be working. But when the one is somehow dead, his iris scan will not be working anymore, because iris scan is related also to the blood that is moving inside the eye itself. So that's why it is considered the most secure biometric authentication way. So biometric authentication mechanism could be subject to some attacks, and one of these attacks could be, for example, attack related to cryptography. If I have like a door sensor or a sensor that accept my fingerprint, and then this sensor sends this data to a server, and the communication between the sensor and server is not secured in a proper way, someone could intercept this data and change the value, but he will not change the value of the data that is user inputting. At the end, the sensor will send to the server a request, and the server will respond by either accept or deny. This could be, for example, 1 for accept and 0 for deny. So the hacker can intercept the reply from the server and change the 0 to 1. So the door will be opened. Fine. So after doing authentication in a proper way, we move to the authorization stage. And in authorization stage, we provide the subject with the needed requirement or with the resources that he is entitled or she entitled to deal with. So authorization is about using access controls. So when we were looking to the example of firewall policy, and forgive me if I am bringing recalling it every time, because in firewall we have a practical example for authorization. The firewall policy, which is no more working. I don't know why. The firewall policy is defining based on a special criteria, that's identification, to permit or deny access to a specific resource. And that's what do we mean by the access list. Access list provide a way to define what is your permission, what is your rights to deal with a specific system. We have multiple ways to implement authorization. One of this way is called, for example, the discretionary access control, and other one is mandatory access control. In mandatory access control, it used more in government and in confidential or in other way security classified areas such as government, intelligence, military, something like this. And in mandatory access control, the system, for example, if we have a file share server, and this file share server include classified information, nobody will be able to access this file share server until it got the required clearance. So if we are talking about military people, anyone who is at a certain grade will be eligible to see this data. But anyone below this grade although he is required to check this data because of his job nature or due to a specific mission, will not be able or will not be allowed to view this data, although the owner of this data will require him to do so. So that's why it is called the mandatory access control. In mandatory access control, system is what define what should be read and what should not be read. So it is managed by system, and we cannot alter what is the requirement of mandatory access control. And it is somehow managed by a centralized security policy. So as long as you are below a certain grade, you will not be able to see this data. Once you get the clearance or the required clearance, you will be able to see and deal with this data. Unlike the discretionary access control or optional access control, I have a problem in pronouncing this word, by the way. So in optional access control or optional access control, we have the data owner himself who can give the permission to other users to access data or not. So example for the discretionary access control is a file share server for financial team. And the financial manager or finance team manager is requesting from IT to grant access to a new hire or to grant access for someone outside the financial department. Although the other one is not from financial department, but he need to access to this data for business needs. And who could request this access and the access will be approved after this? He will be the data owner. So in optional access control, data owner could provide or could authorize the action. While in mandatory or MAC access control, data owner cannot change the permission, cannot request the exception for the permission because everything is managed. In Active Directory, we can create groups. And these groups, for example, group for financial team, group for administrator, group for IT, and based on group membership, user can be allowed to open a certain share folder or not, correct? This is a model of access control called role-based access control, that based on your role, based on your group membership, you will be able to access a specific system. There is also another type of access control called the rule-based access control. In rule-based access control, one of the viable examples for this is to have social media websites open during the lunch break. But after the lunch break, the social media accounts or the social media websites will no more be allowed from organizational internet service. So it is an access control based on a specific rule, specific duration or schedule. Like when we said in the firewall policy, we can define access control based on a certain schedule, when the schedule was all the time, if you remember this part particularly. Okay? So what is the difference between data owner and data custodian? In fact, understanding the definition or the difference between both of these definitions is very important. Data owner is the one who owns the data. For example, if I'm talking about financial data, customer records, and so on, then the owner in this case could be the business, which is represented by the CEO or the chief financial officer or the chief commercial officer. It is owned by business, but it should be someone who is executive that is representing the business. So in this situation, if someone is requesting access to the customer's data, the approval shall be gained from the data owner, which could be the CEO, for example. Okay? But who should provide the access by himself? CEO does not have the time to go and modify the firewall policy to grant someone access to this kind of folders or this kind of data. So he delegates this responsibility to someone called the data custodian. And we are, as IT, we are the data custodians. We enforce the rules and apply the policies that are authorized and approved by the data owner. Clear? When we apply a specific access control list or policy, we can utilize two approaches. We can use whitelisting, and in whitelisting, we deny all and we specify something. such as the firewall. Any firewall by default will deny anything. And you start by configuring this firewall to allow only specific traffic. And that is what we call as a whitelisting. On our systems, we could have a security control that limit or restrict which applications users are able to open on the computers related to organization. So we can allow users to open PowerPoint, Excel, but whenever they try to open browser other than Google Chrome, they could be blocked from doing this activity. Are we familiar with a similar control? It is called application control. Preferred route for what? It is a combination of both, yeah. Because in case you did, you cannot do blacklisting on firewall, for example, because blacklisting means that you will allow any and you will deny specific. And that will not work because in firewall, you need to deny anything and then you should choose which can be allowed and which can be denied. That's right. But in application whitelisting or in application control, maybe some people would choose to deny specific application from being executed, such as deny to open Solitaire, Spiders, try to open Microsoft games, try to block Microsoft App Store and something, and then allow anything else. And they may work in another approach by allowing only Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and deny anything else. So depend on the situation. Some people may try to apply the whitelisting in application control, and they might end in a wrong way or in a bad way by limiting the system capability. So they might be interested in do the blacklisting instead. Blacklisting also might be applicable in a particular situation, which is in blacklisting we could have we could have a firewall, and in this firewall we have a website that is published behind this firewall, okay? And for a certain political situation, some countries are attacking our infrastructure. You understand me, right? So in this situation, we can do a policy on the firewall to blacklist traffic that is coming from a certain IP address related to a certain countries. And that can be another example for blacklisting. We allow any country to communicate with our website, but we deny specific countries or specific IP addresses that could have like a malicious impact on our websites. And each firewall nowadays, by the way, includes a way or include like a database. FortiGate is no more working, by the way. Don't know why. So anyway, any firewall have like a database, and in this database, you can specify to allow traffic from a specific country or deny traffic from a specific country, by the way. So you have like an object, and this object is labeled by the flag of country. So you can easily select which countries that you want to make your data or traffic available for it, and which you don't want to do. If you are working with government and this service is offered for local citizens, it will be no sense to allow this service for external countries, to restrict it to be only accessible from the local country itself. And how to differentiate country? IP addresses. They have a similar control that based on the IP address that you are coming from, it will define that you are from this country or not. And one way to come over this is by using proxy. Proxy is like a way to open internet from other country. So in case I am in a country and this country is blocking me from using a certain service, I could subscribe to a service such as NordVPN, something like this. And by doing so, my traffic will be diverted to USA, another country. So when I open this service, I will be appear from the country that my traffic is originating from. And by the way, using VPN service is illegal in some countries and could subject people to huge fines and sentences, by the way. Okay, fine. So accountability means to, as I mentioned, to get logs, and these logs can help in promoting the accountability and the non-repudiation. Okay, and you need just to make sure that logs only is not enough. As long as logs are not being reviewed, so the logs will be useless. And logs should be also measured based on the required retention period, which means you need, as per your application or as per your business requirement, to define for how much time do you want to keep the logs. Okay. So in the slides, as I mentioned, we have a lot of recommendations that some of it could be relevant to our course and some are not. I try just to explain the most or the key parts, but at the end you will have an option to get it just in case you want to go through it. Single sign-on is a function in the organization that allow you to authenticate once and access many times. For example, and one of the examples of single sign-on, the Active Directory and the file sharing. You access to your organization device using username and password, and after then, whenever you try to open other resources such as file share or internet, you might not be required to enter the password again. Are we familiar with this? Because using the Active Directory and essentially by using a protocol called the Kerberos, this is Kerberos. Kerberos is a creature from the Greek myth, which is like a creature with three heads, something like this. Yeah, separate three heads. So they took the name of Kerberos because the operation will work like this way. In Kerberos, when you log into the Active Directory or the domain controller will give you like a ticket, and whenever you will try to access any service under the same domain, you essentially will provide this ticket to the destination service. So this service will check if this ticket is valid or not, and based on that, it will grant you the access. It will not request from you to re-enter the password once again in order to access it, as long as this ticket is still valid. Okay? So, and of course, all of this happens in the background. And of course, if we are using SSO, we can have a single point of failure. That's why when we were discussing the domain controller yesterday, I mentioned that domain controller is one of the essential services in the organization. So whenever you implement a domain controller, you need to consider the disaster recovery plan for this domain controller by making high availability setup or something like this. Fine. So before having the single sign-on or Kerberos, we have a protocol called the Network LAN Manager or the NTLM. And NTLM is a kind of authentication protocol that allow you to access to the network or do authentication. But as NTLM was less scalable and require challenges and authentication to be succeed in authentication, it was somehow limited and not as easy as Kerberos in order to make the life easier for the users. So Kerberos work in this way. Whenever user login, he will request or she will request a TGT or ticket granting ticket, and then the domain controller will respond back by the TGT. And whenever the user requested to access a service, it will send this service the TGT, and after then the server will be accessible by the user. So Kerberos include a lot of information. We have a lot of tickets types in Kerberos. We have concept called TGT, TGS, ST, KDC, which is all of them are elements related to Kerberos server. But In reality, what we only need to understand right now is that Kerberos is used by Active Directory, and it is not a property for Active Directory itself. It is a protocol that has been used by the Active Directory to make the single sign-on process work in more convenient way. So I believe that concludes the part of identity and access management. We just got explanation for some concepts.